Hello and welcome to NexTalks. I'm Nex, and this is where I talk. Today we're talking about attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, known by its acronym ADHD. This topic is particularly interesting to me because a therapist told me a couple weeks ago that I might have ADHD, and it sent me into a mild identity crisis. So let's dive in. What is ADHD? ADHD can be looked at as two separate sets of symptoms, one relating to attention and one relating to hyperactivity and impulsivity. If you have the attention for it, I'm going to read off the symptoms of ADHD from the DSM-5. Now, don't run off diagnosing yourself with ADHD just because you experience some of these. Only a trained professional can really diagnose properly. There are also a lot of overlapping symptoms that could be stemming from other diagnoses, so just make sure to consult with your healthcare providers before jumping to any conclusions. Since my audience and listeners are predominantly adults, probably 100%, I'm just going to be speaking to the adult diagnosis for ADHD. If you're curious to learn about ADHD in children, I encourage you to research that and explore that further on your own separately. I'm not going to be getting into that at all in today's episode. So for adults, which is considered age 17 or older, at least 5 symptoms are required. And there are other requirements as well, like it can't be blamed on a different diagnosis. Like I mentioned earlier, it also has to have been present for at least 6 months. There's all sorts of but it has to also impact important areas of your life, like your ability to do well in school, in social situations, and at work. So even if you don't meet all of the requirements for a formal diagnosis, it's still helpful, at least for me, to think about these different aspects of my personality and my sense of self as being related to impulsivity or hyperactivity or issues around attention. I think it's been really helpful for me, even though it originally gave me some kind of identity crisis. Ultimately, it has really helped me to understand myself better, and I hope it can do the same for at least one person listening. All right, let's get into it. So you have to have at least 5 of the following symptoms in one or both of the categories. So the first category is inattention. There are 9 potential symptoms total, and they are as follows. Often fails to give close attention to details or makes careless mistakes in schoolwork, work, or other activities. Often has difficulty sustaining attention in tasks or play activity. Often does not seem to listen when spoken to directly. Often does not follow through on instructions and fails to finish schoolwork, chores, or duties in the workplace. Often has difficulty organizing tasks and activities. Often avoids, dislikes, or is reluctant to engage in tasks that require sustained mental effort. Often loses things necessary for tasks or activities, is often easily distracted by extraneous stimuli, and is often forgetful in daily activities. That sums up category number 1. On to category number 2, which is hyperactivity and impulsivity. Same thing here, at least 5 symptoms have to be present, and there are 9 total. Often fidgets with hands or feet or squirms in seat. That one rhymes. Often leaves seat in classroom or in other situations in which remaining seated is expected. Often runs about or climbs excessively in situations in which it is inappropriate. In adults, this may be limited to subjective feelings of restlessness. Often has difficulty playing or engaging in leisure activities quietly. Is often on the go or often acts as if driven by a motor. Often talks excessively. Often blurts out answers before questions have been completed. Often has difficulty awaiting turn. Often interrupts or intrudes on others, for example, butting into conversations or games. These symptoms have to have been present before the person was 7 years old as well. And again, like I said, there's a lot of nuance to getting a formal diagnosis. My intention is not to help you self-diagnose in this episode, so I'm intentionally not giving all of these bureaucratic requirements. I just want to spread the information that ADHD doesn't always look how we think it looks and isn't necessarily the experience that some of us may have thought that it was. So even if you just rub your fingers together as a small little fidget, as I do, that can still be considered a form of hyperactivity. And even talking a lot is a form of hyperactivity, where I personally always thought of hyperactive as someone who can't sit still. They're like running around and having tons of energy, shaking their leg, and just much more obvious hyperactive energy in the body. I never really thought of talking a lot as being a hyperactive mouth or thinking a lot as being a hyperactive mind. So it really helped to change my perception on a lot of these things, and hopefully it can do the same thing for someone out there. Now I want to talk a little bit about my recent experience. After jumping through the many flaming hoops of health insurance bureaucracy, I finally got set up with a new therapist. During my intake session, the therapist mentioned that I might have ADHD. She told me that she had never before had difficulty figuring out someone's diagnosis. I asked her if it was necessary for her to diagnose me with anything, and she informed me that they need a diagnosis code to bill my health insurance. While doing my research for this episode, I decided to call my insurance out of curiosity to see what diagnosis she ended up using. She chose major depressive disorder. I mean, at least I have the actual symptoms of ADHD. This helps to give just a glimpse into the severe dysfunction of our healthcare system, particularly around mental health. But I don't want to get too off track ranting about that in this episode. We'll have to save that for a separate episode about the healthcare system in general. So she tells me I might have ADHD, which I was initially very resistant to. Like I said, I had a lot of misconceptions about what ADHD is and how it presents. I didn't consider myself to be someone who has trouble focusing or is hyper or impulsive. But like you just saw, after actually reading the symptoms, I realized I actually do and am. I have historically had a hard time listening, been very talkative, have trouble keeping myself from blurting my thoughts out impulsively, and have a hard time minding my own business. I always thought of being hyperactive as a physical expression. I never really thought about the idea that my mind could be considered hyperactive, but I have been told that I overthink throughout my whole life. I think we all know that I have a hyperactive mouth too. The name of my podcast is NexTalks because I love to talk. I tend to say what I think, and I can talk for a long while uninterrupted. My mind and mouth could definitely be considered hyperactive. As a little side note, I actually do have a hard time sitting still, which I never even realized before. It doesn't manifest as that classic busybody unable to sit still. I tend to have smaller fidgets like rubbing my fingernails together. I will kind of like play with my skin. I'll just kind of like pull at my skin, not like pick at it, but I'll just kind of like hold it or pinch it a little bit or rub my leg, like very subtle movements that I never even realized that I did prior to her mentioning that I might have ADHD and starting to kind of do a deep dive into how this might manifest for me. And as I started to notice these things about myself, I got really overwhelmed because I have long considered myself to be neurotypical. I've had multiple people ask me if I have ADHD, to which I've always assured them that I don't. One of my coworkers has been convinced I have ADHD since long before this therapist came around and shook my foundation. I remember when they first asked me if I had ADHD, I said no. And they said, "Are you sure?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm sure. I'm really productive." They were like, "You can have ADHD and still be productive." But I thought I couldn't have it, not only because I misunderstood the symptoms and how they could manifest differently in different people, but also because I consider myself to be a pretty successful, productive member of society. So how could I possibly have a disorder? As I continued to research and have discussions with other people I know with ADHD, so much became more clear to me about my life. I'm actually not as focused and organized as I thought. Not naturally, anyway. There's actually a whole kind of sub-community of people that have ADHD and above average IQs. So smart kids with ADHD are often not diagnosed, as they're able to use their intelligence to help offset some of their challenges. My ability to process and assimilate information led me to implementing many of the strategies that are used to treat ADHD without even realizing I was doing it. I read books, I consumed tons of content about how to be organized, focused, independent, and free. I started meditating in my early 20s. I'm now 33. I've been using calendars, to-do lists, alarms, and other organizational strategies to keep myself productive and competent. I've been drawn to the flexibility, power, and freedom of the entrepreneurial lifestyle as far back as I can remember. I mean, to put it simply, I have been indescribably lucky. I have been able to build a system and lifestyle that really allows a person with ADHD to thrive. So while it was a difficult pill to swallow at first, this insight was ultimately a good thing. It's given me clarity about some of the things I've struggled with throughout my entire life. It's reframed my understanding of myself to be more accurate. It's helped me to realize that I am not alone in my experience and that many people can relate to it. It's given me language to communicate more clearly and succinctly about myself with others. I mean, imagine me with my motor mouth trying to describe all of these different things about myself to someone versus 3 words. I have ADHD. Even though I don't technically have the diagnosis of ADHD, mainly because it doesn't interfere with my ability to have success in the important areas of my life, saying I have ADHD to someone really helps them to understand me better and quickly. I have found that many people have ADHD or suspect they may have it, and it helps me to connect with people even faster than I could before. It also helps people to extend grace, mercy, and compassion towards me when I can express one of my struggles and vulnerabilities to them. I don't want to use it as an excuse, but it can at least give some context for when I slip up, and it also helps me to set boundaries. For example, when I'm working at the kava bar and I'm making someone a drink and they try to engage me in some kind of conversation, I can just say, hey, sorry, I have ADHD. I can't really focus on 2 things at once. And honestly, most humans can't focus on 2 things at once. But it does give me kind of like an out rather than just telling them, hey, don't talk to me, you're distracting me. I can kind of blame it on myself a little bit and just say, hey, I have ADHD, just give me a minute to finish what I'm doing and then I can talk to you. So I was talking with one of my friends who's also neurodivergent, and she said that she had heard it said that being neurodivergent is like playing the game of life on hard mode, while the neurotypical people get to play on normal mode. And I imagine many people can relate to that statement. But I have to be honest with you, I feel like my particular brand of neurodivergence has me playing the game on easy mode. I always knew my IQ was an advantage, but if I actually have extra energy and mental activity, isn't that exponentially more powerful? Now, on the other hand, Dr. Alok Kanoja, a Harvard-trained psychiatrist and founder of the channel Healthy Gamer, talks in one of his videos on ADHD about how the data seems to suggest that ADHD can cause depression. A common symptom of depression is going over the same thought over and over and over again. In a hyperactive mind, how much more powerful the effect of this might be. Now, this is bad news if the thought is a negative one, but amazing news if the thought is a positive one. This leads into the concept of hyperfixation, which is the tendency to get entirely absorbed into whatever you're focused on. My early exposure to the concepts of positive psychology and meditation were literally life-saving. A lot of other things have helped me too, and I was gonna go into them all here at the end of this episode, but then I realized that I have done episodes on all of this stuff already before I realized that I love them so much, potentially because of being neurodivergent. In episode 3 of NexTalks, it's called Productivity, I outline the exact to-do list technique that I use, as adopted from Brian Tracy's book, Eat That Frog. I also go into the concept of flow states towards the end of that episode, and now I'm seeing how closely that ties in with how our brains perform best when they have the ideal amount of stimulus. In episode 4, called First Things First, I talk about how to start your day so that it goes the way you want it to, as taught in Hal Elrod's book, The Miracle Morning. I share tools that help with problem solving, organization, and planning, which is especially helpful for training the prefrontal cortex in our brains. In episode 5, I talk about the importance of meditation and its vast benefits, and I do a full guided meditation in episode 11. Meditation has been proven to enhance focus and control of the mind. So if you haven't already listened to them, I encourage you to do that next. That's episodes 3, 4, 5, and 11. If you've already listened, you might want to listen again now through the lens of helping to manage neurodivergence. I also have a full 8-week meditation program available on my website if you're into that kind of thing. But for now, I leave you with the homework of listening to those other episodes, getting caught up, and letting me know what you think. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of NexTalks. I'm Nex. I talked. I hope you liked it. If you'd like to help me be able to keep sharing information like this, please support at my website, nextjuice.com/support. If you'd like to add to this conversation about ADHD, or if you have a topic you'd like to hear me talk about, you can drop it in the comments or reach out to me on social media. Thanks again. Love ya.